Right, hey guys, today we're going to talk about Reagan. And so our essential questions, what did Reagan see as economic benefits to Reaganomics, his economic plan? Who is the first female appointed to the United States Supreme Court? And name at least two measures Reagan took to combat communism. All right, so domestic policy, he's going to advocate for supply side economics, also known as Reaganomics. These two terms are synonymous. They mean the same. It's going to get called Reaganomics because he uses this a lot throughout his presidency, this plan. And it's going to provide tax cuts specifically to the wealthy. And if the wealthy receive these tax cuts, the idea was that that would reduce government spending because the government is not receiving so much money in tax revenue. Therefore, they can't spend as much on programs. Also, increase investment by the private sector. So businesses now, if they don't have to pay as much in taxes, they can use that extra cash or profit to employ more workers, to build more buildings, to do whatever that they want to do to expand or make more money. And also, these tax cuts would lead to production and jobs and prosperity, which goes back to the businesses and individuals just having more money in their pocket. All right, opponents of this called it trickle down. And the idea they saw was that the wealthy would get the tax cut, and then any kind of money that they had that they invested or spent, the benefits of that would trickle down to the middle class, and then the benefits of the middle class investing it or spending would trickle down to the poor. But they're going to argue the poor get the least in all of this, the last remnants of any profit left over. Okay, and so I want to show you a cartoon. It looks like Peanuts, but it's actually not drawn by Schultz. It's just a spoof on that. But Lucy said to Charlie Brown, if you cut taxes on the rich, they'll invest that money and create jobs for everyone. And that was Reaganomics. That was definitely someone who was supportive of Reaganomics. Okay. All right. So also I wanted to show you that with the help of Southern Democrats, congressional Republicans, but they had Democrat support, are going to cut over $40 billion of domestic programs. Food stamps, student loans, mass transportation. So a lot of social programs are going to get cut during all of this. But Reagan does support spending a lot on one particular area, and that was defense. So massive defense spending. With the tax cuts, the massive tax cuts added with the high defense spending, you're going to have a deficit, which means a shortfall. All right, you are sending out more money than you're bringing in, and that's over $20 billion a year. Deficits over a 1-year period. So $20 billion deficit we're going to have. Because of that, the Graham-Rudman-Hollings Balanced Budget Act is passed. Now, this is the names of all the guys involved, so they had to have their name on it. But just don't overlook the balanced budget part. So they're going to balance the budget with spending cuts even to defense. They're going to slow down the defense spending that Reagan had enacted. And they're going to reduce that deficit by $66 billion in 2 years. So that's pretty amazing. All right, Reagan also supported deregulation. And this was cutting back on federal agencies and limiting their impact on businesses. In other words, like doing away with entire agencies that once made rules for businesses and watched them like a watchdog to make sure they were doing things correctly and safely. So Reagan's going to cut back on that to save money and to say we don't need that, that's wasteful. And this also helps the struggling automobile industry at the time in the 80s, where all these regulations from the 70s and Nixon had enacted, if you remember, on automobile emissions and safety issues, they're going to be significantly reduced now that we don't have these agencies watching over these companies. The good thing is you save money. The bad thing is these companies now think they can do whatever they want to because no one's watching them. We had that even most recently in our most recent economic downturn, which involved federal regulators not doing their job and also involved Wall Street, sort of having a major bump in the road and the banking industry along with housing. With that, I want to show you this cartoon that shows Wall Street has fallen on this gentleman, and federal regulators are waking up from their nap and saying, I've been asleep for the last 7.5 years. Have I missed anything big? So the idea was they were asleep at the wheel, and during the Reagan administration, they were cut out altogether. So when you have no regulation, Wall Street and everyone else are just going to kind of bend the rules and do what they want to do. All right, which is not necessarily a good thing for us. Okay, so that's deregulation. All right, then Reagan's going to appoint Sandra Day O'Connor, who is going to be the first female justice appointed to the Supreme Court. And she also is the first, obviously, since it's Reagan appointing her, the first really conservative female we have on the court. So there he is, there's Sandra Day O'Connor. She's actually going to serve for many, many years, just retired only a few years ago. She outlives President Reagan. Okay, and still alive today. And then foreign policy. Reagan wants to restore the military might and bring back this superpower image we had. He's almost ushering back in the Cold War, which is so different from Nixon with his linkage and détente. Reagan's going to bring that back, and this competition returns. He calls the Soviet communists the evil empire. He spends billions of dollars to build new weapon systems, B-1 bombers, expands the Navy up to 600 ships. He thought if we're expanding our military, which is why he increased the defense budget, then the Soviets would have to do the same to keep up, and they would collapse in doing so, because he knew their economy was not capitalistic, it was communism, and it just couldn't survive it. In that sense, he was a genius because he was right on that measure. Okay, a picture about that. Here's a good picture of the evil empire of the Soviet Union that Reagan dubs them as. Now, next I want to show you, well, I'm on it. Okay, next I want to show you the Strategic Defense Initiative. All right, so Reagan is going to increase spending on SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, also known as Star Wars. Okay, and so not this Star Wars, but although this comes out in the 70s, all right, this Star Wars comes out in the 70s. It's coming out again, The Force Awakens, but 77 is when the first Star Wars movie comes out. That's going to be in the minds of people when they see what Reagan's doing here with the Strategic Defense Initiative. They're going to call it Star Wars, system of lasers and particle beams that would destroy enemy missiles before they could reach U.S. territory within space. All right. Critics say he's only increasing this arms race against the Soviet Union, which is not a good idea. All right. And so a picture of that. Before I do that, I have to share with you some Star Wars music because it's just only fitting. All right. And a picture of, now this is actually what it was. So the idea was we would have these satellites in space and that they could detect when the Soviets had launched a missile. And then our submarine could launch like an anti-weapon missile at that missile and intercept it and blow it up in space. Okay, that was the thinking. And Reagan put a lot of money into SDI. Again, others said you're only increasing the nuclear arms race or the weapons race because they're going to then come up with a weapon that can supersede anything we could shoot it down with. Okay. All right, so that's that. All right, Reagan also supports friendly dictators, believe it or not, to keep out communism in Central and South America. He works to overthrow the Sandinistas, who had taken over in Nicaragua. They were a communist group. And we put a lot of money into a group called the Contras. If you think Contra means against, contrary. So the Contras, which were rebels fighting the Sandinistas, we're giving a lot of money to the Contras. And then it says when a group in 83 led to the establishment of a pro-Cuban regime in Grenada, which was a small, tiny island in the Caribbean, Reagan ordered a small force of Marines to invade the island. So submarines are going to invade Grenada and stop or prevent a communist building of a military base there. And it becomes a success for Reagan. So it's kind of like the opposite of Bay of Pigs. It actually works, and we keep out communism from Grenada. The Iran-Contra affair, all right, same kind of background, except we have to go to the Middle East first. Iran and Iraq have been involved in this bloody war, and Reagan's aides come up with this plan to keep Americans in the dark. So Americans, the public doesn't know this. We're going to sell U.S. anti-tank missiles to Iran in exchange for hostages in the Middle East. So we sell them anti-tank weapons to Iran. They give us the hostages. And we also give, of course, the money from the sale. Someone in the Reagan administration, something in the Defense Department, thought it would be a great idea to use the profit from that deal with Iran to fund the Contras fighting communism in Nicaragua. Okay? This is an illegal diversion of funds. Congress has to give approval for that. They did not. They did not know about it. So illegal activity happening in the Reagan administration. Reagan always argued and testified when this came out that he knew that there were arms sold to Iran in exchange for the prisoners, but did not know about any money going to the Contras in Nicaragua. The man who did know here, Oliver North. Okay, this is Oliver North. I can, as a little girl, remember him testifying before Congress because it was all over the news like every day, and they publicized his testimony. And he argued he was the mastermind behind selling the weapons to Iran, but sending the money to the Contras. Okay, and he testified for many, many, many days, and they were trying to figure out was Reagan involved, and that was never. They never quite connected the two, so he was never fully implicated. Okay, and last is Mikhail Gorbachev. So Gorbachev's going to take over in the Soviet Union here in '85 as leader, and he's not going to be like any leader they've ever had. He will introduce new reforms into the USSR, known as glasnost, which means open, is opening up their country to visitors and to trade, and perestroika, using free market practices, almost like capitalism. This is unbelievable. They're a communist nation, and now their communism is literally crumbling. And Mikhail Gorbachev is helping that to happen by introducing capitalism into their own nation. He ends the arms race with the United States and further reduces Cold War tensions by pulling his troops out of Afghanistan. We had been funding the Afghani people to fight the Soviets. The Soviets had invaded Afghanistan during this time. By the way, later those Afghanis are going to use our own weapons we've given them to fight us in the Afghan war, most present. But anyway, after winning the election in '84, Reagan leaves office as the most popular president in recent history. And most historians would argue he's one of the top 5 most popular presidents of all that we've had. So a couple of pictures with him. Here's Reagan with Gorbachev, and Reagan visited Moscow. Now, Reagan was very much into containing communism. We mentioned Grenada. We mentioned the Contras. But here you see, once Mikhail Gorbachev takes over and opens up the country, Reagan's much more open to linkage and developing relations once he sees that they're going to go more capitalist. Okay, but not until that happens does he turn the tide there. All right, and if you should probably go back to your essential questions and make sure you can answer them. What did Reagan see as the economic benefit to Reaganomics? He saw reduced government spending, increased investment by the private sector, lots of jobs, industry will grow, people will have work, and they will spend their money. The first female to be appointed to the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor. And 2 measures Reagan took to combat communism, I would definitely say SDI or Star Wars as a way to intercept missiles from the Soviet Union. Grenada, going in and invading to make sure that the communists did not take over in Grenada. Okay? All right. I'll leave you with one final picture. This is what a lot of people thought of Star Wars SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative. the old Soviet Union as the Death Star attacking the United States and us shielding it. You guys have a good night.